In this video, we're going to be talking about two hormones that come from the pancreas called insulin and glucagon. So these hormones are produced by the pancreas, but specifically what cells actually create them. So if I was going to look at the pancreas tissue, there are something called islet of Langerhans cells. There's two types, there's alpha and there's beta, and each type creates one type of hormone. So the islet of Langerhans alpha cells create the hormone called glucagon, which is released when glucose is gone. That's a way that you can help remember it. And then the beta cells is the one that releases insulin. So we're going to talk about insulin first, and we're going to draw the feedback loop for insulin. Insulin starts when you eat food. So if you have breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or a snack, you immediately will break that down using your digestive system. You will put all of the nutrients into your bloodstream, okay, including sugar. So that's going to increase the blood glucose levels. So glucose is going to be traveling through our blood. Now, we don't want that glucose to necessarily stay in our blood, because if our blood glucose levels are really, really, really high, okay, we could actually go into something called a diabetic coma. You do have a homeostatic level of blood glucose, so we want to make sure that we keep that blood glucose levels around the same level. There is normal fluctuations, but we want to make sure that they're not getting really, 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 really high off the charts. So that is going to signal the pancreas. The beta cells in the pancreas are going to release insulin, and insulin is going to do one of three things. So the first option is it's going to go into the body cells and tell the body cells to increase the permeability, or like the amount of glucose being let in to the body cells, so that the body cells can use that glucose in cellular respiration. Okay, because we need glucose to make ATP. That's the first place we're going to send it. So any body cell that needs glucose is going to get glucose. If all of the body cells are good for glucose, they don't need any extra, we're going to store that glucose, because our bodies are hoarders. And glucose is super important. We don't want to have it left in our blood, because then it would travel to our kidney, and then potentially our kidney would pee it out. We want to make sure it stays somewhere where we can use it for later. So the next place we're going to store it is we're going to take a bunch of glucose and we're going to bond it together, and it's going to form glycogen, which is a really long molecule of glucose, and we're going to put it either in the liver or the muscles. Okay, but we have like limited amount of storage in our liver and muscles so that glycogen can stay there. So if all of our liver storage and all of our muscle storage is filled with glycogen, the last place that we can store glucose is in our fat tissue. Once that fat tissue is there, we can convert glucose into fat, because fat is made up of the same nutrients, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and that nutrients can then just be a fat molecule hanging out in our fat, so that we can use it for later. So once our glucose is no longer in our blood, this is going to be a negative feedback, changing our blood glucose levels back down to a normal level, which will turn off the beta cells from releasing insulin, so that our insulin doesn't continue to store it as fat, or store it in our muscles, or store it in our cells, and take away too much glucose in our blood, which would make us feel really faint and not feeling too good. So that is our insulin feedback loop. Okay, when we are taking our glucose from our blood and we put it into our cells, this is what it would look like. So you have receptors on the cells that would take in glucose, and insulin is basically telling those receptors to allow the glucose in. If we have too high of glucose, it can end up really bogging down our blood, because it takes up space. We don't want to have too much blood glucose levels. We want a good amount of blood glucose levels. So not too much and not too little as well. Now, the other hormone that's kind of like the opposing force to insulin is called glucagon. This is when we maybe haven't eaten for a while. So this could be you just haven't had a chance to had your meal yet. Okay, so it's been a couple hours and maybe it's almost lunchtime, or maybe you're exercising and you're using up all of the glucose. Okay, you could release glucagon in that situation as well. So anytime you haven't eaten in a while, glucagon is going to be released. Okay, glucagon is stimulated when there's a decrease in blood glucose. So your blood does not have any glucose left in it. So your alpha cells are going to release glucagon, which kind of sounds like glucose is gone. It's because it's released when glucose is gone. And we're going to take some of those storage glycogen or some of the fat and make it into glucose and put it back into our blood so we can bring our blood glucose levels back to a normal level. So the first place we're going to look is in the muscles and the liver. And we're going to take all of that glycogen out of the muscles and the liver. We're going to break it into individual glucoses, because remember, glycogen is just a long chain of glucose. And we're going to put that into our blood. If we have all of that glucose used up, then we go into the fat. Okay, the fat is basically carbon and hydrogen and oxygen, and we're going to break it into glucose by just taking 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens and make a glucose molecule, and then we can use that glucose molecule in the cells or wherever we need it at that time. So this is all of the elements that are found in macromolecules. Remember that carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are the only ones found in glucose and in fat. Okay, I talk about like the little baby dinosaur called Chomps. That's kind of my little trick to remember what elements are found in our macromolecules. So once we do one of these things, whether we're taking the glucose from the glycogen stores in the liver, the muscles, or we're taking it from fat, we're going to increase our blood glucose levels back to a normal level, which will then stimulate the pancreas, which will stop the pancreas from releasing glucagon. So remember, if we're going to be needing that glycogen stores from our liver, this is what it would look like. We would break it down into glucose, put that glucose back into our bloodstream, and then we can use that in our body so that we can actually use it for cellular respiration or whatever we need it for at that time.